Welcome to Chapter 6. If you haven't noticed by now, we're actually going to split Chapter 6 up into two different sections, 6.1 and then 6.2. And what Chapter 6 is going to do is we're going to introduce production and resource use. So employees or businesses actually employ a wide variety of resources to produce a particular good. So each business is going to use their own particular recipe, if you will, to produce that particular good. So let's take, for example, what a wheat farmer may use to produce their particular commodity. And a wheat farmer is going to be using tractors, they're going to be using fertilizer, they're going to be using fuel, they're going to be using a lot of different resources in seed and water and all of in the soil and the land and everything like that. Well, let's compare that to a place like a cotton gin. Well, a cotton gin is probably going to be using a lot more electricity or a generator of some kind to power the machines. They're going to might be using more of, maybe they're using more manual labor, or and if they're not using more of it, they're using it in a different way. They're going to be looking at the resources, the inputs into a cotton gin are definitely going to be different from a wheat farmer. Now compare that to a meat packing plant. Well, how does a meat packing plant differ from a cotton gin or from a wheat farmer? In each case, they're each going to be using their own recipe of resources. They're going to be using a wide variety of resources to produce that particular good. So, for example, some business may use more seasonal labor, whereas some may require more land. And each business is going to be different with those resources, and they're going to be trying to use them in order to accomplish a specific goal, and that is to maximize their profit. So beyond everybody trying to maximize their profit, or beyond that similarity, there are different similarities, especially whenever you get into the different inputs. So we can actually group inputs into categories for description and analysis. So one of the first things that we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to take those wide variety of resources and we're going to classify them into four main categories: land, labor, capital, and management. Hopefully you've heard of those before, because we have actually mentioned those whenever we talked about some of the information. I believe it was back in chapter 2, either chapter 1 or chapter 2 in this lesson, where we talked about the biological resources, human resources, things of that nature. But we're going to actually classify these inputs and we're going to group them into categories. So firms, also another similarity is that firms share specific production and cost relationships. And one of the first cost or production relationships we're going to talk about is an input to output production, and we're going to get into some phrases known as total physical product, marginal physical product, and we're going to find out that virtually all resources have a certain specific production relationship that almost everything follows, as well as cost relationships. So even though these are different businesses employing different resources in order to maximize their profit, businesses as a whole, on a generic sense, are relatively the same in terms of which inputs that they use and these production and cost relationships. So in this chapter, we're going to provide a foundation for economic decision made by businesses. We're going to look at the level of output to produce. What is the profit maximizing level of output? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the level of variable inputs to employ, and as it uses its current productive capacity. So we're going to talk about, as this chapter goes on, we're going to talk about those similarities. We're going to basically group all businesses together. We're going to talk about what is the level of output that they should produce, what is the level of variable inputs that we should use to employ its productive current capacity. And then also, a couple of the first things that we're going to introduce, some key economic components, is perfect competition. So we're going to introduce what is perfect competition. Then we're also going to introduce this model of graphing and looking at things in terms of a single input and single output, and how much of a variable input should we use to maximize our profit.